talking of the hoary scholarly sport of trawling literary texts for historical allegory. In fact, that sport has grown somewhat out of fashion, mercifully. It sought to find elements of political or military history preserved intact beneath the fictional surface. What I have in mind is an inquiry after hitherto unexplored human and social consequences of that political or military history, the latter's presence in the elusive processes of society and the individual mind as expressed in literary texts. This is not a naive interdisciplinarity that merely juxtaposes two different sectors of inquiry, studying different methods, applying different methods to different material. Rather, each model is invaded by the other, adopting yet modifying each other's methods, altering the status of the material studied by each. Political, military, or economic records, normally studied by the historian, are read by literary scholars for the way their concrete records crystallize the subtle, diffuse, and inchoate processes of society and the human mind as reflected in literature. Conversely, texts forming the literary canon are read by the historian for the intellectual and affective illustration of the political, military, or economic setting. Hence arise the long familiar field of social history and the somewhat more recent, though still well-established, field of emotional history. Each set of witnesses is drawn into the service of an unaccustomed discourse, a new sector of knowledge. That is what I mean by redefining the epistemology of a discipline. Conventionally disparate disciplines, here literature and history, impregnate each other in terms of content, method, and purpose. My account is not abstruse enough, I will not draw it further in that direction. The crucial point is that the humanistic study of texts, I'm using humanistic here as a kind of adjectival form of the humanities. There is really no good adjective corresponding to the noun humanities. Humanist will not do, it means something else, much more specialized meaning. So I'm using the adjective humanistic for the nouns to mean relating to the humanities. The crucial point is that the humanistic study of texts, literature, to revert to the nomenclature I decried at the start, but inevitably need to employ, is no longer justifying itself in its own terms, but in those drawn from another discipline openly bearing upon the word outside it. I can proceed to my next and most crucial point. In most of the theory-based lines of inquiry I cited earlier, conventional literary and historical studies were both being harnessed, and here I use the word harnessed in a simple and unstressed way, to the service of an activist agenda drawing on contemporary social concerns and values. The place and role of women, the accommodation of the mind to its environment, the relations between races and communities, the relations between nations, which are the concerns respectively of feminist, psychoanalytic, ethnic, and post-colonial schools of humanistic studies. The center of gravity in the humanities has shifted decisively from self-contained academic exercises within an exclusive value system to an externally defined, externally oriented value system and epistemology. The challenge thus arises how to serve these new externally oriented functions in a manner appropriate to the methodology of these disciplines, and how to adapt that methodology to these new applications. The common run of Marxist literary criticism, though emphatically not many of its outstanding exponents, would accommodate a great deal of what others might consider mere propaganda, without the formal characteristics demanded of texts usually designated as literature. At the other extreme, every conference goer knows all too well the reduction of humane, intrinsically activist theory to fine-spun, abstract, and, in the worst sense, academic exercises disjunct from any reformist agenda on the ground. Finally, no doubt, the turning of an academic discipline to any cause, however activist in bent, will and perhaps should be academic in the sense of providing the intellectual rationale and critique of a social agenda, preventing the practical from lapsing into the merely pragmatic. The problem arises when that intellectual exercise is cut off from a vitalizing relationship with the practical agenda, however stridently it might profess a notional commitment or even undertake a shadow play of activism. All too often, in academic departments across the world, social and political movements involving profound, often bloody sacrifice by others on the ground are deftly hijacked, I will not say harnessed, to the ends of careerism and self-gratification, reducing an agenda of proactive reform to barren theorizing. That does not negate the fact that these theoretical concerns have, virtually for the first time in modern academic history, or any academic history, in any age, attempted on any scale to relate humanistic studies to social issues and agendas. Earlier wisdom, once generally defended, then more and more questioned or even satirized, held that a sound education in canonical texts in a designedly removed academic environment best fitted a man, and it was a man by patriarchal default, for the supremely practical task of governing a country. This was, and in some measure is, the position of traditional British governance, hence adopted through most of the Anglophone world and its former colonies. A similar program is said to have empowered the mandarins in traditional Chinese society. It seems fair to say that only in very recent times, impelled by the theoretical concerns that I have outlined, have humanities faculties in universities opened their mental windows to the world outside, while direct political action on campus has nearly always caused disruption, physical destruction, and little else. I should add at once that this is emphatically not so with other activist agendas, for instance, those asserting that the rights and needs of women, disadvantaged social groups, or persons with special physical needs. Here, a constructive, if incomplete, transformation has taken place in campuses across the world, both in policy and in material construction. And the ideological impetus behind this change has come more often than not from humanities departments. That in itself is a resounding justification for the new turn in humanistic studies. They have been harnessed, so to speak, to a triumphal chariot. Let me move on to another point that may or may not be related. The uncertainty of the connection that may or may not is part of my point. It is more or less accepted that for good or bad, and again, the uncertainty is significant, the great age of theory is over, partly perhaps because it has achieved many of its practical ends on the academic soil, beyond which most faculty and students do not venture even today. Even more importantly, literature departments the world over, and also departments in history and the social sciences, have radically revised their curricula in line with these changes. At the same time, there has been a certain unease with the abstraction inherent in theory, virtually by definition. Especially relevant are the irresistible but recondite and controversial speculations on the word and the text identified with Jacques Derrida and his line of post-structuralism. On the rebound, they might have played a part in a greater, more theorized interest in the material text, the book or manuscript or electronic file that physically embodies, in the literal sense, embodies the words as distinct from the intellectually apprehended structure of meaning built up by the words as signs. The material text had earlier been the concern only of specialized branches of literary scholarship, bibliography, or the study of material witnesses as such, and the editorial concerns to which alone the term textual studies had sadly been confined. These were severely concrete and practical in bent. But now we have the emergence of editorial theory, which would earlier have been considered a virtual oxymoron. Editorial theory is necessarily grounded theory. That's the best thing about it, unlike many other kinds of theory. It expounds general insights into the nature of texts, derived by editors through their engagement with specific texts. It cannot be developed without such specific reference. One may say it allows scholars to eat the theoretical cake and have it too. It also activates the broader pursuit of textual theory, which I would argue to be radically different from the theory of language generally, though branching out from it. The theory of language engages with the operation of language per se, the generation and reception of meaning through signs. Textual theory belongs one step up. It addresses the realized products or compositions of language, integral texts composed using language with special attention to the social and material conditions of production and the philosophical implications of the task. Now, this could be said of a great deal of literary criticism, but textual theory is not concerned with the thematic, structural, or aesthetic aspect of those texts. Its purpose is not interpretative. It studies the way in which all texts operate and circulate, the general conditions in which particular texts convey their particular meanings, which are not the concern of textual theory. That is not the direct concern. It has to be taken into account, of course. The new expansion of textual theories, of textual studies, has contributed to a still greater revolution. It has induced a view of texts, indeed of all subject material of the humanities, in a way that prepared humanistic scholarship for the coming of the computer. I have remarked elsewhere that if the computer had not come into being by other means, textual scholars and theorists would have had to invent it, if they could, of course they couldn't, sadly. But they have, because textual scholars and theorists had habitually embraced analytic practices now radically advanced by the use of the computer, but earlier envisaged and carried out by other, less adequate means. There is a book called The Renaissance Computer that describes the methods which the Renaissance employed and in good measure created for the tasks for which we now use computers. I am emphatically not proposing a distinction between a technical or mechanical branch of literary scholarship and an intuitive or effective core discipline. On the contrary, I would hold any such division to be invalid. But textual studies makes most visible use of concrete evidence in ordered and sometimes quantifiable ways, so that the computer is of greatest and most obvious use to this branch of textual study of texts generally. The computer enables us to process large quantities of textual data, like all other kinds of data, with hitherto undreamt of speed and accuracy, hence to prepare textual corpora and concordances